we are going to use the breaks for those of you who are interested to continue the discussion with Jessica to discuss the outstanding questions that for which we didn't have time after her session. And the first question is by Chris. Chris had a question. Chris, would you like to ask Jessica?
Yes, yeah, hello. So my question is maybe a bit naive since I never really reviewed an article or an even written article. But I was thinking, so first thanks for this very, very interesting presentation. It's very inspiring for me as a new, let's say, scientist to have a bit like, yeah, to know a bit what are the concerns currently with publishing. And I think there are a few things that are very unintuitive to me. And for instance, it is like, I know from people that reviewing is time consuming, especially if you do it well. But in the end, you don't really get rewarded for it, especially if things are not publicized. I mean, and if it's anonymized, yeah, then you get basically no reward for good review. So my question is, it's more like a thoughtful discussion, is maybe later on, could we think about, so I don't know, having a new journal where when we not only supply a list of the authors that participated to the production of the work, but also a list of reviewers that's really like contributed also to the work by criticizing what is done and yeah, if it's done well, improved it. What do you think?
It's a super interesting idea. I think that there's a couple different issues here. First is that yes, as you say, there's generally not a lot of acknowledgement for performing peer review. There's a very interesting meta-analysis of surveys of authors, of reviewers, asking them, why do you do peer review? And a lot of this has to do with, I'm getting recognition as an expert in my field, I'm getting to see a paper early, although to be fair with preprints, that's less of a benefit. And I think there's this idea of like establishing a reputation within the journal. With posting a peer review publicly, and as Nikolai mentioned, citing that peer review, there's this opportunity for more, informal recognition. But the fact is, like, if there's any desire to maintain anonymity or the journal is not supportive of this practice, it is really just unseen. And I frankly think it's quite a waste of really great scholarship for that work in that review and that critique, those ideas to be hidden. But there's various different efforts in this realm. First of all, it's Publons, which is an interesting service, a commercial service that was purchased by Clarivate Analytics, which is, I think, part of Thomson Reuters, where you can receive, basically you send them your receipt of peer review, and then you have a profile where it says where you've been reviewed, and individual journals also send these kind of acknowledgements of who performed review over the year. However, looking at fields like software development or Wikipedia or different projects where there's more there's a different approach to credit, which I think is really kind of the issue that we're getting at here. I think in so much of science, the only contribution that is really recognized and valued is authorship on a paper. And we have a very clumsy way of, at least in our, our fields, we look and we say, who's the first author? But that's not universal. The last author position is in some fields considered to be the least important author. Other fields post things alphabetically. So really, authorship is a really crude system for providing credit. The idea of a contributor is also, there's issues of, in some medical journals, there is a list of people who contributed to the article in a way that does not necessarily come to the threshold of authorship. And I do wonder if there's some way to make machine readable and in a way that could be kind of tallied and appreciated more the contribution of reviewers. And some of them have even suggested, so Dario Taraborelli, who comes from a kind of computer science background, has actually suggested that reviewers become authors on papers, which I think is a very refreshing idea that I think is kind of difficult to think about for people from a background where the author has spent 4 years of their lives toiling on this. But yeah, I mean, certainly new types of ways of recognition would be valuable. Anyway, I'm curious to hear other perspectives on this too.
So I have two
Okay,
quick
thanks.
comments. One is that a number of journals actually allow reviewers to list their names, and this includes Nature and many Nature journals, not all. eLife is one of these journals, as was actually pointed out in the comments. And there are also requirements to detail individual authors' contributions in many journals. I think the fundamental problem is the value that community places on that information. Even in the cases when it's available, it's not taken as seriously as it should. There is certainly more work to be done of explicitly documenting these contributions and making them available. But I think the more fundamental problem is changing the culture so that those contributions are valued more.
Actually, I would like to make a quick comment about exactly this. I think we also need to be careful about getting credit for reviews. And I want to point to Poblins, that is a commercial company, right? And yet again, we are going to sell to Poblins because that's what we do. I had an account, and then when they were bought over, I deleted my account and I asked to get my data and delete it from their servers, because this race of getting credit for everything we do, and I surely agree that we need to get credit for all these hours we invest, but we need to be careful that we don't get caught in this vicious circle, like, you know, prestige of these glamorous journals, things that we don't control anymore. It's under the control of private companies whose only goal is to make money, right? And this desire to get credit sometimes makes us blind. So yeah, it's good to get credits, but it should not become a race for more likes and plus ones and things like that, and just a number game at, oh, I reviewed that many papers, oh, I reviewed that many papers, I reviewed for that journal. I think that would become very, kind of a corrupted system, like arguably some of the publishing race.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very important point.
So I have a question about a different form of assessing papers that doesn't directly involve peer review. Peer review has been with us for many years, and I think it's going to stay with us for a long time. It's useful. We should try to improve it. But fundamentally, we have to acknowledge that peer review is unreliable. And for a subset of the papers, both published in journals and preprints, we have more reliable assessment for how reproducible or the reported work is. And I want to both ask you and pitch this idea to you. If we can establish something that is similar to an overlay journal, but doesn't contain peer reviews necessarily, but rather contains references to subsequent work that has tried to replicate or build upon, doesn't have to be exact replication, just build upon a result reported by paper, and have succeeded or failed to do that. And perhaps we can have an editor who includes those papers. There is certainly some need to mediate editorial supervision of that process. But to me, it seems that such an overlay journal will provide something that is really distinct compared to what current journals provide, which is very much based on a peer review that may have been thoughtful. Maybe somebody spent a few hours reading the paper and wrote a nice, thoughtful peer review. Maybe somebody wrote half an hour peer review intended to sing the paper or just a superficial praise for their friend. But it might be reliable or unreliable peer review, as opposed to having a work that somebody spent months trying to build upon, reproduce, and either succeeded or failed. That's fundamentally more reliable information about the paper, and therefore can attract much more attention than simply another overlay journal or another journal that uses the same process that we know is error prone. This is using a fundamentally different process to evaluate the paper.
I love that idea. I mean, I think the ultimate test of a work is how it is received and built upon. And, you know, perhaps the significance of a paper can only be fully appreciated years down the road, or after it has been integrated and built upon in this fashion. I've also heard the proposal actually by Jan Beltrop, who has been a real proponent of knowledge graphs, that even if you could actually dispense with peer review entirely if you had an automated way of extracting assertions in individual papers and seeing whether or not subsequent publications uphold and strengthen those kind of assertions. And I think that the main issue that is potentially one question for how this could supplement our assessment process is the fact that oftentimes grant cycles, job applications, and so forth, I think right now we're relying heavily on a journal process, which is not fast, but certainly faster than replication, faster than subsequent work building off of an original publication. Although that may not be the case in this community from my conversation with you, Nikolai.
And in general, I certainly don't mean to suggest that we should discard peer review altogether. I think we have a system that mostly works, and I'm not in favor of any sort of revolution. I think we can try a different approach. If that approach is working, it's going to be used more and more, and maybe in the very long term might supplant the current system, but most likely the whole system is just going to evolve in a different way, and journals are going to be very different decades from now. So I suggest it's not necessarily evaluating just preprint. It doesn't have to be preprint centric. Sometimes preprints might benefit from it, but sometimes it could be published papers in journals. I certainly would like to know if somebody has attempted to build upon or replicate a study that has been published somewhere. And to me, that will provide information that is fundamentally different from what is encoded in a journal.
I completely agree with you. And I think that there is a project, I don't know if you're familiar with it, and I'm sure, Laurette, before I definitely am sad to say this is not a non-commercial project, but there is a tool called Cite.ai, which mines citations and identifies sort of the sentiment of those citations to determine whether they're supporting or contradicting a paper. It's certainly not, I think, as robust as what you're describing, where there'd be a curator who actually assesses this, but it is maybe a step toward that direction. I think it'd be really fabulous to see something like that.
Yeah, that sounds like a promising effort. More questions for Jessica?
Or I'd also be curious to hear sort of your experiences and any sort of challenges or issues that have come up in publishing, and what you were thinking about. I mean, I think Nikolai could probably tell some very interesting stories as well, but yeah, I'm also just curious to hear, from all of you, what are the biggest issues that you are concerned about in the publishing system, and other ideas that you might have for improvements.
Well, I certainly don't want to monopolize this discussion. I can easily spend hours and hours talking on the topic. So I'm very much hoping that other people join in. But let me start by making one suggestion, and maybe in the meantime, somebody else is going to chime in and join. But one very simple improvement that I think we can make, and at least I cannot think of a downside of making it, is that all peer reviews, even of rejected papers, should be published on the bioarchive next to the preprint. They can be fully anonymized, and a peer review, if somebody wants, can write it to be completely objective and unrevealing of their identity. So I personally feel that there are upsides of doing that, and that this in fact can improve the quality of peer reviews. Maybe a little bit, maybe not that much, but it's an easy thing to do. And I see no reason against doing it. I would certainly love to have the ability to publish the reviews of our papers that get rejected. And I have an example that will be immensely instructive. I'm just burning of desire to publish it, but I'm not allowed to do that. And I don't understand the reasoning behind it. I would love to be able to share it.
Oh, and I see someone saying that they agree in the chat as well. That's so cool. I think that one of the things that I have been a bit, actually, Andrew, I see that I think you've just it appeared on video. I wonder if you want to weigh in on that.
Hey, yeah, sure, I'd love to. Great discussion, by the way. Yeah, I'm a student in Nikolai's lab, and myself and Gray Huffman, who's another student, we're just chatting about this exact topic last night, and we were just, it would be really nice, I think, just from an accountability standpoint, if you had a review that you really just fundamentally didn't agree with, you could, it'd be a little bit nice to maybe get that vindication if you could, maybe post that review or share that on Twitter and kind of open it up to the community. And, potentially this would kind of force people to, I don't know, consider more who they're asking to review. And, and without the issue of kind of having someone like have to admit to the review and kind of be shamed publicly, it might be kind of a behind the scenes selection process where if there's constantly a lot of negative feedback from someone's review or something along that lines, it can kind of be filtered out without potentially, if people are still opposed to wanting to make those reviews public.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I of course agree with Nikolai and Andrew's comment, and I'm very much in favor of opening up the peer review process. But I think it's, however, good to not forget that not everybody might be in the position to be open about the reviews they write and the reviews they get. I can easily imagine, a prominent researcher that got a negative review that would publish it and kind of try to destroy it and be very, very strong. And even if the review is anonymous and it was written by a more junior colleague, that person could, could be hit very hard by this kind of public slashing of the review, whether it's subjective or objective. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. So I think we must not forget that there is a huge imbalance in, there is a hierarchy.
But the identity of the reviewer can be hidden if the reviewer decided not to sign their review, right?
Of course.
So I'm certainly not advocating that we require all peer reviews to be signed. I respect that there are reasons for that not to happen. I personally try to do it. I think it's good practice, but it's up to everybody to decide whether they do that or not. It's more the question that the content of the review itself should be made public. In which case, I don't see the potential for personal hostility emerging.
I understand the point you're making in terms of having like maybe a more prominent scientist can maybe benefit more from this, in the sense that, if they post a review and really exclaim about it, maybe that they would have more opportunity to kind of receive feedback and kind of evoke the kind of response they're hoping to, which could potentially, I guess, be frustrating for people who maybe really feel like they have a review that doesn't really make any coherent sense or something, or feel like it's bashing them unjustly, and they're trying to kind of get traction for people kind of understanding that, but then also not being able to have any takers, I guess, for their cause.
I'd just like to add too, while reviews are often anonymous, sometimes it's not too hard to figure out who a reviewer is.
Well, editors always say that authors guess wrong. So it is true that authors might have these hypotheses.
That could almost be worse.
Which, well, it depends. If that is the case, maybe reviewers are going to be more constructive and more thoughtful in what they write.
So I just want to add a little data point here. I love this discussion, and I love this perspective of using the community to kind of help contextualize or rebut a review. One of the features that distinguishes Review Commons from eLife's preprint reviews is that eLife's project mandates the publication or the posting of the review reports on the preprint, and Review Commons does not. It gives authors the option to opt out of that, which has been, I think there's quite a lot of controversy around this, but we have found that authors are actually opting out more than they're opting in to posting these reviews. So I definitely appreciate, I think, and my sense of the reason is partially that authors want more time to respond to the critiques and kind of fix their paper. But I would love, I think, for this attitude that you're representing of this desire for transparency to be something that could be more widespread and understood here. We'll certainly be trying to encourage greater transparency through language and more encouragement. And I think this is a really great benefit that you cite.
Sorry, I have a quick question. The reviewers, do they know in advance whether the review will be public or not?
So they don't know whether the review will be public, but they definitely consent to their reviews being public at the time that they review.
And has anyone ever compared reviews that are public and those that are not? Is there some kind of difference between these two kinds of?
Yeah, there is a comparison, in time, not, I don't think any journal has done a randomized controlled trial, but there are cases from Elsevier where they have, I believe it's Elsevier, where they have taken journals that swapped or switched into open peer review, and they compare it by like sentiment analysis and find that the reviews are having more kind of constructive tone, but the acceptance rate doesn't change at the journal. So I can put that link into the chat. Yeah. It's a big concern that by making the peer reviews public, the teeth will come out of peer review and maybe it'll be less effective, but I don't think that's the case based on that study.
And the actual peer reviews can be anonymous, right?
I think yes. So both in Review Commons and in the study that I've mentioned, the reviewers, I think, had the opportunity to remain anonymous. Yeah.
I see a very big distinction between the contents being shared and the review being signed. I think the review being signed is introducing many legitimate concerns. Even though I think it's good practice, I respect many reasons against signing reviews. But I see fewer concerns for simply sharing anonymized contents. One thought that I have for Review Commons is that while it includes 17 journals, and that's a good start, it certainly will be more powerful if it includes more journals. And one of the concerns that I have about it is that this initial trial may not show its full potential. I think in general it's a very good idea, but it's an idea that becomes increasingly powerful as there are more and more journals participating in it. And that, I think, is one of the caveats that should be taken seriously when we interpret the results from it.
Thank you. It's a very good point. I think that obviously for authors, having additional journals would be great. I think one of the challenges that we've encountered as we begin to do this is that that we want to make sure that the affiliates who are affiliated with the service are really bought in to the concept. They're really making the effort to reach out to their editors to ensure that the editors are familiar with the idea and the commitment to not re-review the manuscript. And so I definitely think that there's this kind of social issue of making sure that the affiliate editors are on board, and also a technological issue, which I'm sorry to say, the kind of back end of the manuscript submission system is, as far as I can tell, not necessarily, as well integrated. So as you can imagine, there's multiple different platforms that do this. There's recently been an effort called MECA to make manuscripts actually interchangeable between the different platforms. But this is all still very much a work in progress. So I think that, yes, I agree with you, Nikolai, and barring getting over these technological and social issues, this would be great. And thank you for that feedback, because I think it's important to take into account.
So I had a quick question about that sort of very topic. What is Review Commons going to do when multiple journals want one paper, or see it as really attractive?
Well, the way that the service operates right now is that certainly the author is making the decision of where to submit their manuscript. So in a sense, it's identical to the current process where there's this assumption that the author is submitting only to a single journal at one time. I think that the question of if there is a manuscript on bioRxiv with reviews that are attractive, certainly editors from other journals can approach that author and say, hey, we'd like to publish your paper. This actually happened to me, not in the context of Review Commons, but a couple of years ago, being approached by a journal based on a bioRxiv preprint, which was great. I think that I definitely think that there's an issue here for editors, because much like going to conferences, scouting papers to request submission, it does invest resources. There's a requirement to invest resources into this. And as you may know, some journals, for example, PLOS Genetics, have preprint editors who are theoretically just looking at bioRxiv and recruiting papers. So I think that this issue is not unique to Review Commons, but right now, there is this question of what happens as it becomes easier to evaluate an individual paper and invite it for submission.
The authors get to be in a very favorable position. Instead of trying to publish their paper in one journal, now they have multiple journals being interested in publishing their papers. So perhaps the authors will not complain too much about it. Wonderful. Well, this discussion is very interesting, and I can see it keep going for a while, but it's about time to start our next session. So let me thank Jessica Polka once again for sharing with us some of the innovations in preprinting, publishing, and evaluation of science. I like to think that I'm up to date with those issues, but I certainly learned a few things from your presentation. So thank you very much. And thank you for the interactive spirit of the discussion. I certainly very much enjoyed and appreciated that.
Thank you all so much for participating. Yeah, thank you again for the invitation.